Hello everyone. In this video, I'd like to explore a little bit what is philosophy. This is an introduction video for a series of videos that we're going to do for a class that we're just starting. And usually at the beginning of a class like this, I want to try to say what it is that we're going to study. So you say, what really is philosophy? If this is an introduction to philosophy, what is it we're being introduced to? So there's a number of different ways of trying to answer that question, and I'd just like to explore them and try and include some of the ones that I think are more fruitful to include. There is this opening image is just a reference to the beginning of philosophy, back with the ancient Greeks. This is a drawing of the Acropolis in Athens, in the ancient world, with the crown by the Parthenon. And a lot of good philosophy took place here. So let's take a look at our subject. Well, to begin with, it looks like philosophy resists any attempt to come up with a clear and concise definition. It's the case with some things that if things that we think we know what they are, if we try to formulate those things or express what we know, we find that it's more difficult than we imagine. And philosophy seems to be in that category. It becomes apparent to us when we try that it can mean different things depending on how we look at it. Some time ago, I had consulted a philosophy dictionary in an attempt to find a straightforward definition. In that dictionary, underneath philosophy, there was a list of, I think, 21 different definitions of what philosophy was. And then it looked as though all those definitions kind of corresponded to individual philosophers who thought that what they were doing was philosophy, and that so their definitions had to be included. So if there's so many definitions for something, you start to think maybe it can't be defined. But maybe that's not the case. Despite the difficulties, I think we should be able to say some general things about on this topic, and I think we can say some general things. There's two possible definitions or that I'd like to make use of to elaborate a little bit. I mean, the first definition is one I discovered in a textbook some years ago. I mean, but that I liked it because it was contemporary and it was kind of concise and to the point. So we'll start with that one. According to this definition, we could say philosophy is thinking critically about questions that matter. Now, it could hardly be more brief. Still, we can elaborate on it and take a look at the key words and trying to develop the ideas a little bit further. If we say to start with that philosophy has to do with thinking, and that's pretty clear, and philosophy is an intellectual activity, a kind of heady activity, but we don't want that to be overstated or overdone. So, although philosophy does involve a lot of thought, it should never be just thought. It should include more the whole of ourselves as human beings. This second key term here is kind of qualifies the first one. So it's thinking, but it's thinking in a certain way, thinking critically. And you say, what does it mean to think critically? And it's not just our ordinary associative thoughts about things, where one thing suggests another, we just automatically, we hear something, we automatically think along a certain line. But critical thinking requires a different kind of attention to what we're thinking about. And you could say it involves analysis, thinking more deeply, maybe not trying to avoid being just superficial in our responses and so forth. And so critical thinking is difficult. It's not. It's a kind of work. I mean, you can't allow your thoughts just to wander. You kind of have to pay attention and sort of focus on what it is you're trying to resolve for yourself. The third key word we're going to focus on is the idea of questions. In a way, it may be the case that thinking critically about things raises questions for us, and questions that we might not have had if we didn't try to think more deeply about things. And questions in philosophy are highly valued, say they're emphasized, maybe in an odd way, even more so than the answers that you come to. In a way, if questions, I use this phrase here, questions are the driving force behind philosophy. I mean, if you don't have a question, you're not really thinking about things in a way. So questions animate our thoughts, and so it's important to be in question. Although it's not easy to be in question, oftentimes uncomfortable. If questions, always seek a resolution, or they seek an answer, but once you have the answer, you say you rest in the answer. It's kind of like the activity is over at that point. It's the end of the process. So questions animate the activity of philosophy, and some have argued that philosophers can be measured by the strength of their questions. Finally, we focus on the last phrase. We say philosophy is thinking critically about questions that matter. And so it's questioning, it's thinking critically, but not about just anything. It's not idle curiosity, but it's questions that we think are the important questions in life. Questions that would make a difference to us, how we thought about them, or what we thought the answers sort of told us about how we should live, or what's right and what's wrong, what should we be striving for in our life. I just give a few examples. Does life in itself have any meaning? If so, how would you determine what that is, or what is it? Is there a God or a divinity? And God, what's he expect from us? Is there existence after death? These are all pretty difficult questions to answer, so we think of them as philosophical questions, but we still ask them because we feel like it would make a difference, in the way that we live. So we think they're important. The second definition that we wanted to propose is one that's traditionally given, and that is to break the word philosophy down into its origin words. And we say that philosophy comes from two Greek words, philos plus sophia, and so philosophia. And apparently it was Pythagoras, one of the early philosophers, who used this term philosophy to describe what some of the people were doing at that, or had started doing at that point. So if philosophers like to look at the roots of words, so sometimes you can find something about what something is by seeing what it was originally. So if we look at the Greek terms, philos is a Greek word for love. And there's some other Greek words for love, which we'll speak about in a couple minutes here. And then Sophia is a Greek word for, oftentimes translated as knowledge or wisdom. And in my preference is to think of Sophia as wisdom. So there's an interesting distinction between knowledge and wisdom. So according to this definition, you'd say philosophy is the love of wisdom, and a philosopher is thus a lover of wisdom. So we can still say that's interesting, but you can go a little bit further with the analysis of this definition. So we could ask, what does it mean to be a lover of wisdom? Or what does it mean to be in love with wisdom? We could appeal to one of the ancient philosophers, Socrates, speaks on this subject. If we'll see later that Socrates was a kind of inspirational teacher for Plato, and Socrates himself never wrote down his ideas, but Plato wrote extensively about Socrates and discussions that Socrates had with other people about philosophical subjects. Those are all called Plato's dialogues. One of those dialogues was called the Symposium, in which a group of young men were together and kind of celebrating a successful performance of a play by one of the people present. So a playwright had put on a play, and his friends had gathered in the evening to celebrate it, and they were sitting around drinking, so it's kind of a drinking party. But these are philosophers, and Socrates is there, so he wants to give a kind of serious aspect to it. So they propose to have a contest among themselves where they'll go around the table and everyone will give a speech on a particular topic, and then they'll decide who gave the best speech and they'll win some prize. But the topic in this story, the symposium, is love. And so each of the participants gives a speech about love. And Socrates, who's usually given in these dialogues, Socrates is the one who kind of represents the best understanding of whatever it is that people are talking about. So he's the kind of venerable philosopher, wise man philosopher. Socrates talks about the love of the philosopher, which is the question we just raised. Like, what's it mean to be in love with wisdom? There is the word philia is the term in philosophy, and philia is a Greek word that usually refers to brotherly love. If you think of Philadelphia, for instance, is the city of brotherly love. So you say Philadelphia, philosophy, the love of wisdom. It's not clear that that sense of love is quite describes what the philosopher feels for wisdom. We think another application of philia is like philanthropy, and a philanthropist is a kind of lover of mankind, somebody who wants to help mankind out. So, but again, it's not clear that philia is the right word to describe the relationship between the philosopher and wisdom. So in the symposium, when Socrates gives his speech, he decides to speak of the love of the philosopher in terms of eros. And eros, which is the root for the word erotic, for us. And it's a Greek word for a different kind of love. It's not brotherly love. It's more a passionate kind of love that people can feel for one another, even sort of sexual attraction. So it's very strong, intense kind of emotion. And Socrates wants to say that the love that the philosopher feels for wisdom is more like eros than it is like philia. The philosopher is passionately in love with wisdom. And this erotic love is kind of a complex and dynamic. It's complicated, but it's also filled with a lot of life and excitement. If you've ever been in love in a kind of passionate way with another person, you might understand the feelings associated with it. Socrates argues that this kind of love, it's complex and it's dynamic, and it always involves two different elements combined, and that means those elements are lacking and longing. It's lacking because there's always, in this kind of love, you could say that there's something missing in the lover. And the lover within himself or herself is incomplete, or feels a kind of emptiness within themselves, and without the beloved. So it's like the beloved is perceived as completing the person or filling in what's missing in their life. And you say that the lover only feels complete or whole when he is with his beloved, when they're together. And that's kind of the source of the attraction, of the lover for the beloved, something missing in the lover. And then perceiving that what it is that's missing is provided by the other, so one longs to be united with the other person as though that would complete them or make them whole. So you could say that's kind of what desire is all about, the desire to be united with the beloved. So there's these two elements that kind of are connected with each other, the lacking and the longing. So we can understand that the dynamic nature of erotic love. And then we want to say, how does that apply to the philosopher? So we apply that same dynamic to the philosophy as a lover of wisdom. We say that he's driven by his love for what he lacks. The philosopher recognizes that he doesn't have what it is that he most wishes for, which is wisdom. So he's driven by his lack of wisdom, sort of to long for it, to desire it, to pursue it, to move in the direction of wisdom. So this is kind of a motto for Socrates, that philosophy is more about being in question. It's more about recognizing that you don't actually understand what it is that you feel like it's important that you understand. So you move in the direction, or you're drawn in the direction of that which is most important for you, or that which you feel will make you whole or complete. So we can see that the Socratic notion of the love of the philosopher is a passionate longing, love for wisdom. And we already tried to distinguish a little bit, say that wisdom is not just knowledge, but wisdom is a kind of specialized kind of knowledge. You see, knowledge is can be like, you know, uh, not not everything that we know is important to know, but wisdom is more about is kind of practical knowledge, or knowledge that's based in experience and so forth. You see, to be wise is to understand things, or to understand what's really important for us to understand. And so that's kind of what the philosopher is really interested in, is the kind of knowledge about what life is and how it should be lived. So you might see that there's some parallels between these two definitions that we proposed. Uh, I, like this second definition because it brings this emotional, gives more emphasis to the emotional aspect of what it means to be passionately uh, driven, to understand something. And it seems like that kind of love, or that kind of sort of commitment, to to trying to understand something, what you think is important, is what enables, anyone. I mean, if you have a passion for a particular subject, it enables you to get past some of the difficulties that if you didn't have that passion, you wouldn't be able to get past them. So, anyhow, I think that's part of what drives the true philosopher. Beyond these definitions and what we've been able to derive from them, there are still two other ways of thinking about philosophy that we should at least try to comment on, because they're also significant. First of all, we could say that philosophy is a 2,600-year-old tradition. It's a body of knowledge which has been built up over this long history, with virtually every age making its own contributions, most of it linked to what has gone before, built up, as it were, to where we are today. So we could say that philosophy is this history. But then, secondly, we also have to say that philosophy is an activity that one can engage in, that we can engage in. Obviously, the tradition, we would think, consists mostly of this kind of active mentation. But then we have to remember that it's possible for ourselves as well, that we could do our own philosophizing in this sense. This would be our own questioning, our own seeking for what is true, with respect to whatever question we think is important. Ideally, then, for us, our study should be both studying the tradition and thinking for ourselves. We could ask, what's the relationship between the two? And can they proceed independently of each other? I would say that the ideas and the values that we have grown up with and that we have inherited from our Western cultures are largely derived from this 2,600-year-old tradition. And it's hard to imagine that there would be anything that we could think about that wouldn't be influenced by that. I'll just give you the closing question then. But then what do you think?